This is A to Z with Mark Zinno, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, and it starts now.
Good afternoon. Welcome to A to Z here on Locked On Sports Atlanta, where today I tell you a lot is left to be decided. Welcome in. It is a Friday, and we appreciate you joining us here on A to Z on Locked On Sports Atlanta. Lots to get to today. Hawks have a huge game tonight, obviously, to get into the NBA playoffs officially as they take on the Cleveland Cavaliers. Braves continue to struggle, and of course, we have some Falcons news that we'll get to here in just a moment. Lauren Jabara, sideline reporter for the Hawks on Valley, will join us coming up later on in the show. We've got a ton to do today here on this Friday. Very excited to have you guys with me. And let's start with the Atlanta Falcons, because I heard an interview that Dean Pease gave earlier this morning on one of the local radio stations here, and it got me thinking. And I begin to wonder this year with this Falcons team, like, who's going to be better this year, the offense or the defense? And a lot of people generally would just point to the offense because I guess, it's easier to score points. I mean, clearly, again, it's Kyle Pitts. I know there's no running backs and the quarterback has changed. And, maybe this is the year where the defense actually is a little better. But, I started to think about what Dean Pease was saying because, he talks so much about a mentality of his defenses. And he mentioned how in his coaching career between New England, Baltimore, Tennessee, and Atlanta, prior to last year, he only had one losing season in his coaching career as a DC. And he continued to lament the idea that there's a mentality problem within the Falcons, that their defense can't ever be great. And he always was around teams where the mentality was the defense was always going to be great. Well, if you want to be great, you need to have great players. I mean, it's that simple. He had great players in New England. He had a ton of great players in Baltimore. He had very, very good players in Tennessee. You don't have a lot of great players here in Atlanta on the defensive side of the ball. You have one great player, and that's Grady Jarrett. You have a really, really good, probably soon-to-be great player in A.J. Terrell. If he can get some measure of consistency, we'll really find that out this year, if his ascent continues to go up where it's supposed to be. So you don't have a lot of great players. But what made me start to think is how much influence, not necessarily does Dean Pease have per se, but how much influence does Arthur Smith and Terry Fontenot, how much do they want to make the identity of this team defensive versus offensive? Dan Quinn obviously was brought in here as a defensive guy. And believe it or not, I know the numbers people don't remember this, and the numbers don't necessarily bear it out. But, for a, let's call it, 24 game span, more like 20, let's call it 24 if you include the playoffs. The defense was the best part of this team. And that's tough to say given the offense that they were in the second half of 2016, right? Because if you go from like I think it was week 12 on or week 11 on, the last 6 games of the regular season, all the games with the exception of the second half in the postseason, the second half of the Super Bowl in the postseason, and then all of 2017, when that was a top 10 defense, that was the best stretch of Falcons defensive football for the last, call it 30 years. I mean, it really was. Objectively, it really was. And so, he had that going for them for a little while, and it all fell apart very, very quickly. And some of that is the reason it fell apart is because Vic Beasley stopped getting the quarterback and Deion Jones stopped being a viable player. And, a lot of these other guys who played over their heads just for those 22, 24 games just didn't last. But that's why this draft, I think, is so important. And what they draft is really going to tell you what they want the identity of this team to be. And I said this yesterday when Aaron Freeman from Locked On Falcons was on the show. You can go back and listen to that interview. He and I don't agree often, but when we do, it's always worth a conversation. It's one of those things where this draft will tell you what they value as most important at this specific point in time. again, quarterback is always most important. No one's going to deny that, at least nobody with a functioning brain who works in NFL circles that's going to deny that quarterback is the most important thing. And while it won't bother me to see them take a quarterback, I think it probably is the best move in the big picture for this organization to take a quarterback. That said, I get not taking one. What I won't be okay with, as I've said repeatedly, is drafting wide receiver. That is absolutely the wrong move for this team. Even though draft pundits and everybody I keep seeing says that the Falcons are wide receiver is a position of need. No, it isn't. It's just of all the positions of need, it's like at the bottom of the positions of need, if you ask me. I'm okay with them taking an offensive tackle. I'm okay with them taking an edge rusher. I'm okay with them taking a defensive lineman. I'm okay with them taking a cornerback or a safety. I'm even okay with them taking a linebacker, although there aren't many at the top of this draft that are really standout guys, especially in the top 10. That said, I think that decision will tell you a lot about what Terry Fontenot and Arthur Smith want this team to be. How do they want to build this franchise? If they draft a left tackle or a tackle, period, one of these top flight tackles that are coming out, it says to me that guess what? We're going to solidify our offensive line first, then we're going to protect the quarterback, and we're going to make sure the young quarterback that we end up taking is set up for success, and we're offensive minded. If they take a pass rusher, it tells me that once again, they've recognized that the Falcons are one of the worst pass rush teams in recent memory in the NFL, and it absolutely needs to be addressed. And if you have any hope at keeping Grady Jarrett here long term, you need to put somebody next to him on the line that can wreak havoc and make Grady Jarrett's life a little bit easier and much more fun to play next to. Take a cornerback, and it tells you, guess what? We recognize that we are bad on defense. And the best way to get good quick on defense is to be able to shut down other teams' passing games with two corners who can eliminate patches of the field, right? Like that's what they did. That's what all these decisions tell you about what they think. And you can say, oh, Zinno, they'll just take best player available. Yeah, okay. I get it. Best player available. But when you are in a rebuild, there is a process and there's a step and there's an order and all that stuff has to go into place. And if you don't do things in a certain order or with a design path, you're going to screw it up. So again, it's about best player available. That's not a wide receiver. There's just legitimately no reason to draft a wide receiver. It's the one move that should make Falcons fans absolutely vomit right on the spot if they take a wide receiver. And I'm going to say that for the next 2 weeks leading up to the NFL draft. There is no reason for them to take one. Not with Marcus Mariota throwing them the football. Just there's no reason. You can't justify it in my mind. So I wonder who's going to be better this year, statistically, the offense or the defense. And part of me thinks that if the defense can play a little bit better than they did last year, they may win a couple more games than you'd think. Again, I'm not going to put it all on the defense. They're not going to be good. But if Dean Pease can coach them up and make them a little bit better, and I'm sure he's had input on some of these guys that they've signed and some of these players that they've brought in, but none of them are standout names. You're really relying on one great player in Grady Jarrett and one really, really hope to be great player in AJ Terrell. After that, everybody's pretty much just a guy that we know of. There's nobody else that stands out to anybody or should stand out to anybody within the organization. All right, coming up next, the Braves celebrated on their past homestand, and they didn't celebrate last night on the road. Plus, the Trae Young disrespect is real. That is coming up next right here on A to Z on Locked On Sports Atlanta, free on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Search for Locked On Sports Atlanta. Follow us on Twitter at Locked On ATL, at Mark Zinno, MarkZinno. More on the Braves coming up next.